Hey guys. Tonight we begin in the cool, misty quiet of a medieval French morning. The sky is still bruised with early dawn, and chimney smoke curls upward like someone trying to scribble secrets into the clouds. You're not in a castle. There are no knights here. Just you, the cobblestones beneath your feet, and a whole town of sleepy vendors clutching their baskets, carts, and questionable cheeses, waiting for one sacred sound: the bell. Because in this town, you cannot legally sell so much as a radish before the church bells ring. And you, a humble street-goer with tired shoes and possibly no coin, are about to witness what happens when centuries of rules, rituals, and ridiculous market laws all pile into one marketplace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly toward the town square, guided by the soft clatter of wooden wheels and the occasional goat. Vendors are already lining up at their assigned cobblestone spots. Yes, assigned. In some towns, you could be fined for parking your cabbage cart 3 feet to the left of your license spot. Accuracy, apparently, mattered more than airflow. You pause beside a woman selling pears, except she's not selling yet. She's crouched beside her crates, eyeing the bell tower like a soldier waiting for the charge. Her cart is covered with a cloth and technically invisible to the law. The bread seller nearby clears his throat. Any moment now, he mutters, though it's unclear whether he's talking to you or just willing the bell to move faster. His loaves are round, neatly stacked, and slightly steaming, because if they're not round, they're illegal. But that's a different story. We'll get to it. The bell rings. It's not a grand, glorious chime. It's more like someone threw a spoon at an old pot, but the effect is immediate. The cloths are pulled off, the baskets uncovered. The street fills with the chorus of morning hawkers. Welcome to medieval commerce, equal parts ritual, rulebook, and chaotic improv. Historians agree that many French towns in the 13th to 15th centuries had official bell-based market hours, often tied to church services or feast days. The bell didn't just announce time, it activated legality. Selling before the bell, you were a criminal. Selling too long after it, you were a nuisance. And both came with fines. You wander. A town inspector strolls past, tapping a stick against each stall. You notice the vendors straightening up when he approaches. No one wants a fine for unsanctioned parsley or an improperly stowed weighing stone. The inspector sniffs once at a hunk of cheese. Too early, he declares. Too warm. The seller nods, lifts the cheese, and sets it in the shade. Crisis averted. Further down, a man selling lard is making the sign of the cross over each tub. For luck, he says, but also because it's market regulation in this town. Animal fats must be blessed before sale. Is it hygiene? Theology? Nobody's quite sure. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread church requirement or just one particularly devout mayor's idea. And then there's the criers. They stand on overturned crates, voices sharp and rhythmic, announcing goods like auctioneers with poetic flair. Onions from the south, dry as your mother-in-law's wit, one shouts. Beans from the blessed field, untouched by goat, another calls. But even this has rules. You must announce your goods at a certain decibel. Too loud and you're disturbing the peace. Too quiet and it's seen as unfair manipulation of nearby buyers. And yes, there were fines for inappropriate volume. You can't make this up. As you wander, you hear a bell tower ring again, not for time, but as a signal. A second market has opened on the far side of town. It's for non-locals only. Out-of-town vendors weren't always allowed in the main square. They had to wait their turn, wait for their bell, and often pay extra in tax for the privilege of selling their suspiciously unfamiliar garlic. You duck into an alley for a moment of quiet. Two teenage girls are whispering near a basket of wilted greens. One holds up a soggy radish. Do you think anyone will notice? Not if you smile, the other replies. She pins a flower in her hair and practices shouting, "Fresh radish for your tired stomach." Her accent's all wrong, but effort counts. You step back into the crowd. The sun is climbing. The smells of leeks, roasting chestnuts, and worry fill the air. But behind all of it is that steady thrum of rules, rituals, and rhythms. This isn't just a market, it's a dance. And if you miss a step, the inspector will tap your stall with that stick and say, "Try again tomorrow." You find a spot beside a barrel of apples and sit, watching the world bustle around you. The bell, now silent, still echoes in your bones. And your story through the oddest marketplace in French history has only just begun.
The bread man is yelling, not angrily, just very precisely. "Round loaves, round is the bishop's belly, fresh from the communal oven and certified by Saint Honoré himself." You're not sure who Saint Honoré is, but judging by the way this vendor slaps his flour-dusted hands on his apron, he's deadly serious about shapes. Welcome to the weirdly strict world of medieval French baking, where bread didn't just have to taste good, it had to look legal. You sidle closer to the stall. His loaves are indeed round. Not rustic, wobbly rounds either, perfect domes, crusty on top, scored in a neat cross. And just beside them, a few elliptical loaves, smaller, slightly more golden. He notices you looking. "Illegal for morning," he mutters. "Only allowed at midday or on feast days." You blink. Historians agree that medieval French cities enforced a mind-boggling number of bread regulations, many based on shape. Round loaves for daily use, long loaves for travel, plaited loaves for weddings. There were even regulations about how many slashes you were allowed to make in the top of the dough. Too many, and it was considered prideful. Too few, underbaked centers. A theological crisis. You reach for a sample, but the baker swats your hand gently away. "Not until the weights are checked," he says. "Rules." Sure enough, down the row, a town official with a scale is moving slowly from vendor to vendor. He wears a leather satchel filled with pre-weighed stones, each marked with wax and stamped with the mayor's seal. He stops at a stall, plunks a loaf onto his tray, and frowns. Too light. The vendor sighs, offers a second, larger loaf. The inspector grunts, tears off a piece, sniffs it, and writes something in a little book, probably suspicious rye density. It wasn't just weight and shape. Bakers were also monitored for flour purity, yeast timing, and oven usage. Communal ovens were a common feature in medieval towns, with assigned baking days for each family or guild. Miss your slot? Too bad, no bread and probably a fine. You pass a younger vendor selling biscuits. She has a tiny chalkboard reading, "Baked on Monday." She leans in and whispers, "They were actually baked on Sunday. But if I say that, I'd owe tax to the church." You nod. Sunday bread. Forbidden and expensive. Further down, a man with an unsettling grin is holding a massive pretzel-shaped loaf. It looks impressive, but he's standing a little too far from the rest of the bakers. One vendor sneers. Fancy types like him aren't real bread folk. He probably puts honey in it. Apparently, sweeteners in bread were controversial. Some towns banned them except during festivals. One law in Lyon allegedly required sweetened dough to be marked with a clove, as a warning to buyers. A nearby baker offers you a crusty triangle of something that looks like focaccia, but insists this is pain d'épices. Spice bread, not sweet, not taxed. You nod and take a bite. It is, without question, sweet. You ask why they bother with all this.
Why not just bake what they want? He shrugs and says, because if I sell it wrong, they throw it in the river. You think he's joking. You hope he's joking. Apparently, bread disposal was also regulated. Stale loaves had to be given to the poor or traded to pig farmers. Burnt ones were sometimes buried. One town law required unsold bread to be stamped with a knife to prevent reselling it as fresh. A sliced loaf? Untouchable. And still, bread was serious business. Because it wasn't just food. It was economy, it was trust. A baker who cheated customers could be beaten, fined, or, if particularly unlucky, tied to a cart and paraded through town with a burnt loaf around their neck. Justice loaf, they called it. Probably not a bestseller. You pause beside a flour merchant who doesn't sell bread but ingredients. She offers a pouch of ground barley and adds, good for poor days. Mixed with bean flour, no one can tell. You're not convinced, but apparently that's the point. Historians debate whether bread laws were really about safety or more about keeping lower classes predictable. If you control bread, you control peace. That's the idea, anyway. The bell from earlier rings again, 3 short clangs. The bread window is now closed. Vendors begin packing away loaves. Late buyers groan. A woman hurries over, clutching a coin. Just one, please? The baker shakes his head. We're on to cheese now. And just like that, the town square shifts. Baskets of curd and wheels of brie begin appearing from under cloths, as if summoned by an invisible cheese god. But you don't follow that crowd just yet. You take one last look at the row of bread stalls, half empty now, flour dust settling in the air like snow. And you think, in a world full of unpredictable weather, unstable roads and terrible plumbing, at least the bread came round. You follow the scent of salt and something vaguely fishy into the shade of the next alley. The bread vendors are packing up, and now it's the cheese sellers' hour, which strangely enough overlaps with fishmongers and the occasional sausage hawker. But don't get excited. You can't just set up wherever you want. You pause by a vendor arranging wheels of soft cheese on damp cloth. She fans them with a bunch of herbs, not for smell, but to keep the flies away without touching the product. They fine you if you fan with your hand, she says, not looking up. You might touch it by accident. Another vendor sets down a crate of dried fish, heads all pointing north. You ask why. She shrugs. That's the rule here. Cheese under cloth. Fish with airflow. Meat must not face the church. You blink. The church? She nods. Out of respect. In medieval France, zoning laws weren't just about location. They were about how food interacted with light, wind, religion, and superstition. Historians agree that many towns had detailed market ordinances specifying exactly where certain products could be sold. The logic? Well, that's still debated. Some say it was about odor control, fish in windy alleys, cheese under arches, meat near drainage. Others say it was about hierarchy, grain in the central square, symbol of stability, while garlic and fermented things stayed respectfully downwind. You watch a vendor set up a canopy over his sausage stall. It's made of oiled parchment secured with river stones. Keeps the cheese from melting, he explains. Also makes the inspector happy. They don't like sticky ground. A pair of inspectors appear as if summoned. One has a long pole with a hook. The other holds a leather-bound book of stall placements, checking numbers scrawled in charcoal along the wall. Madame Boudet, one calls. You've shifted 12 inches toward the olive cart. The cheese seller protests. The olive cart moved first. The inspectors stare, unamused. One starts measuring with a braided rope. This may take a while. You wander off toward the fish section. There's a strong smell of smoked trout and disapproval. An older woman mutters to herself while sprinkling sea salt over a row of fillets. Young ones don't rinse the brine properly anymore. All haste, no respect. She gestures at a nearby lad whose fish is questionable. You don't get too close. His stall has been placed near the drain, the punishment spot for latecomers or those who forgot to renew their fish license. You overhear a passerby say, "He didn't face his mackerel westward yesterday. Bad luck ever since." You make a note. West-facing fish equals misfortune. Note it. A boy runs past, holding a string of onions and yelling, "The butter's melting," which, weirdly, makes several vendors shuffle their goods closer to the walls. Apparently, butter was only allowed to be sold in full shade between sunrise and third bell. After that, it had to be salted or stored. "We don't want dripping butter on cobblestones," one man mutters. "It brings wasps, and worse." Historians still argue whether these intricate placement laws were born of hygiene, practicality, or simply a society that loved telling other people where to stand. Some believe it was linked to humoral theory, the idea that certain foods had elemental properties and needed balancing with wind, sun, or humidity. "Cheese must be kept cool and moist," one medieval text reads, "lest it excite the liver." You glance at the cheese. It looks suspiciously excited. In a quiet corner, a man sells vinegar-soaked sardines from an elevated tray. He gestures at a sign that says, "Blessed by St. Peter's relics." You ask if he's serious. "No," he grins. "But the bishop liked them once, so I tell the story." One woman strolls through holding a string of garlic and a legal parchment, apparently required for cross-market sales. "I'm permitted to walk through the cheese aisle," she says proudly, "even though I'm a spice seller." You sit on a crate for a while, watching the ebb and flow of commerce, climate, and cabbage. Overhead, a canvas flaps gently in the breeze. One vendor adjusts it quickly. It had drifted into holy shade territory, which is apparently reserved for candles and relics. You lean back. A fish scale lands on your knee. You brush it away, trying not to think about the eel you passed earlier that looked like it was plotting something. Eventually, the cheese vendors begin packing up. The fish carts roll away, dripping faintly. A bell rings. Not the main one, but a high-pitched market chime that signals transition. Now come the onion boys, the root sellers, the shoelace merchants, and yes, those mysterious cabbage people. The shaded archways empty. The breeze shifts, and the odd rules of fish, cheese, and weather begin to fade. Just in time for something even stranger. You turn a corner and step into a sunny lane where the smell of onions punches you in the nose with no apology. This is the vegetable zone, a long stretch of market lined with baskets, crates, and carts, all arranged with excruciating care. Every root, bulb, and leafy thing here isn't just sold, it's judged. And the first thing you notice is a man being quietly scolded for being barefoot. A town guard, wrapped in a faded sash of authority, points at the man's toes. No shoes, no stall. That's the rule. The barefoot vendor lifts one foot sheepishly, showing a sandal tied with twine. "Slipped off, monsieur." "Doesn't matter," the guard mutters. "Respectable vegetables come from respectable feet." You blink. That's a real rule? Apparently, yes. In many towns, vendors who sold in designated clean zones had to follow appearance codes. Shoes, aprons, even trimmed beards. No barefoot selling of perishables. Something about dignity, but also no mud on the turnips. The onion seller huffs, pulls a spare sandal from his cart, and slides it on. The inspector nods once and disappears like a judgmental breeze. You walk past a row of carts loaded with beets, parsnips, and suspiciously round potatoes. A woman leans over her table of turnips, smoothing each one like a prized jewel. "Only 5 may touch the cloth," she explains, tapping the linen beneath. The rest must sit in the basket until purchased. You ask why. She sighs. Because the law says so, and because Mariette complained last week that I touched 8. She nods at a rival seller across the lane. Mariette glares back. Historians still argue whether such precise produce etiquette was enforced to prevent spoilage, curb cheating, or just control crowd chaos. Whatever the case, medieval towns loved their vegetable codes. You spot a wooden sign posted on a pillar. By order of the guild, no more than 12 carrots per string. Beetroot must be scrubbed. Cauliflower must not resemble brain. That last one feels personal. You pause beside a teen arranging shallots in tiny bundles. She whispers, "If you tie more than 10 together, the tax man notices." Then adds, "But if it's 9.5, they don't know what to do." You suspect there's a deep underworld of vegetable math happening behind the scenes. At the next stall, a man offers you a slightly wilted cabbage. 10 sous, he says, then glances around. Or 8 if you don't tell the weight checker it was harvested yesterday. This is the turnip tax game. Many towns imposed small market taxes based on freshness, shape, or storage status. Older vegetables paid less tax, but fetched lower prices. New ones paid a premium, but earned trust. The result? A black market in beet freshness. A passing inspector, one old man, clearly a veteran, sells only onions, nothing else. Rows of them. Yellow, white, purple. Easier to track, he says. And they don't spoil your ledgers like tomatoes do. You ask if he ever sells carrots. He shudders. Too many shapes. Apparently, oddly shaped carrots triggered fines in some towns. If it looked like a snake or a rude gesture, it could be deemed improper for street display. That, or you had to chop it in half first. Problem solved. At a nearby table, a lady sits with a bowl of herbs and a very serious expression. "These are legal," she says before you ask. "Grown within city limits, washed twice, blessed once." She lifts a sprig of thyme like a sacred object. Yesterday, someone tried to sell parsley from outside the walls. Unblessed. They're still banned. You glance around nervously. A bell rings again, not from the main tower but from a small post at the far end of the lane. It's rung by a boy holding a sign that reads, "No more beet sales past 3rd chime. Lettuce begins now." Vendors begin the ritual vegetable shuffle. Turnips packed away, lettuce lifted, herbs rearranged. You see one woman hurriedly untying onion braids and hiding them under a cloth. "You can't mix roots and leaves during transition hour," she mutters. "Not after the guild fight of '87. You're almost afraid to ask what that was. As the sun climbs and the vegetable lane shifts into its leafy phase, you feel like you've wandered into a strange performance, half ballet, half tax evasion, all under the watchful eyes of invisible rules. And still, the barefoot onion seller now stands proudly with both shoes on. His onions gleam in the morning light. For now, he's legal. For now. You move with the shifting current of the market crowd, drifting out of lettuce hour and into something that smells faintly tactical. A cluster of root vendors are packing up, and in their wake comes a subtle rustle of paper, a flick of tassels, a low muttering that smells like vinegar and tension. You've entered the bureaucratic side of vegetable selling. At a narrow wooden booth framed by red bunting, a small man with an impressively waxed mustache is clutching a scroll like it's a holy relic. On it, a list of vegetable fees so long it needs 2 assistants just to keep it from unfurling into the gutter. 3 sous for cabbage under 1 pound, he says to a hunched woman holding a basket. 5 sous if it's purple, extra for outer leaves. She scowls, peels a leaf off the cabbage, and hands it to a child with an expression of quiet vengeance. Now it's green. The official narrows his eyes but writes green and waves her through. You can't help but laugh. But that's the game here. The turnip tax and beet bribes. An entire system of vegetable valuation so detailed and absurd that it would make a modern accountant weep. Historians agree that local market taxes in medieval France could fluctuate wildly based on size, shape, ripeness, and even seasonal gossip. Some vegetables were noble, like leeks on feast days. Others were seen as peasant staples, cheap but taxed anyway to keep things fair. You pass a vendor holding a suspiciously large beet. She winks and whispers, "It's really 2 beets glued together with honey." You look closer. She's not kidding. "Save me 1 whole fee." A guard walks by, so she spins the beet to hide the seam. The man next to her is carving tiny letters into his turnips with a blunt knife. Personalized root vegetables are considered artisan goods, he mutters. No sales tax. Is that true, you ask? Historians still argue whether that loophole was real, or just a prank played on the tax inspectors, he says, not looking up. Further down the lane, a small drama is unfolding. A vendor stands beside a cart of radishes, clearly too many for one person to sell solo. But next to him, a stuffed cloak and hat rest on a broomstick posed like a second seller. A tax official raises an eyebrow. "That's not a person. It's my cousin Gerard," the vendor insists. He's shy. "You've claimed a double seller license." "He's licensed too," the vendor says, lifting a tiny scroll tied to the broomstick's wrist. There's a tense pause. Then, with the resigned sigh of a man paid too little for too much, the official stamps the scroll and walks off. You watch as the vendor slips a radish into a customer's pouch without recording it. He grins. "That one's between me and Gerard." You shake your head and keep walking, past a line of tax boxes with carved wooden slots. Carrot. One woman in a blue shawl argues furiously over a round, white root. "It's a parsnip," she says. "Parsnips are free today." The clerk shakes his head. "It's a pale carrot. That's taxed." "Do I look like someone who would lie about a carrot?" "No," he says, "but your basket does." She storms off, muttering about medieval injustice. You glance at the basket. It does look shady. Later, you pass a vendor dressed more finely than most, offering premium noble herbs. His display includes bay leaves tied with velvet, basil rolled into scrolls, and rosemary arranged like a crown. "How much?" you ask. "Depends," he says. "Are you buying for yourself, or are you an emissary of the Abbess of St. Clair?" You open your mouth, then close it again. He leans in and whispers, "Say the Abbess sent you. The clergy tax rate is half." You whisper back, "The Abbess sent me." He hands you the rosemary with a wink. "Then tell her the mint's free today." As the sun climbs higher, the smell of onions fades, replaced by the yeasty air of someone baking too close to the tax zone. An older vendor throws a suspicious glance toward the officials. "They tax my carrots, but not the olives, because the olive vendor sings hymns." She sings what? She sings. That counts as public piety, exempt from taxation. So you stroll over, and sure enough, the olive vendor is warbling a cracked rendition of a Gregorian chant while selling pickled garlic. She hands a small jar to a boy and bows as if giving communion. It's too much. You find a quiet corner by a crumbling pillar where someone has scratched a crude image of a man trading turnips for a goat. Above it, the words, "Better beat a fool than tax the wise." You stare at it a moment, then hear the faint jingle of scales and the shifting rustle of paperwork. Time to move on. The beat bribes are behind you now. Ahead, someone selling songbirds next to scented candles, which is, oddly, illegal. But that's another rule for another stroll.
A burst of chatter draws you toward the next alley.
It's not the contented hum of bartering or the rhythmic thump of cabbages being stacked. No, this is sharper, musical, almost theatrical. You've stumbled into the world of street criers and hawkers, where performance meets produce, and volume is currency. A man in a tattered teal tunic cups his hands and bellows, "Sweet figs for sweethearts, one bite, eternal loyalty." A woman beside him counters, "Don't trust his figs, they've seen more summers than your grandma." You blink. Is this normal? Very. In fact, medieval French towns had entire codes dedicated to what vendors could and couldn't say out loud. Hawking was a skill, but also a legal tightrope. Say the wrong thing and you could be fined, silenced, or if truly unlucky, dunked in the public water barrel for vocal misconduct. You pause near a soap vendor with a voice that could sand wood. "Lie strong enough to cleanse your sins," he yells, "and your mother-in-law." A guard gives him a side-eye, but lets it slide. Barely. Historians still argue whether these speech restrictions were designed to preserve decency, prevent fraud, or simply because town officials didn't want to listen to bad puns all morning. Whatever the reason, rules existed. Some towns banned comparative insults, no dissing other vendors. Others forbade invoking saints in sales pitches, unless the saint actually approved the merchandise, which, spoiler alert, was unlikely. You pass a pickle seller mid-shout. "These cucumbers saw the last eclipse and haven't stopped weeping since." She cackles. A child claps. A town official scribbles something. You whisper, "Was that legal?" "Depends on the saint," someone behind you murmurs. You don't look back. Farther down the row, a cheesemonger is nervously repeating, "Soft as cloud, sharp as a knight's blade," over and over. He avoids eye contact with the nearby clerk holding a wax tablet. You suspect he's testing phrases, seeing which ones get him fined. A woman selling candied almonds gestures you close. "You want the real secret?" she asks. "Don't mention taste. Mention dreams. Dreams are legal." "Dreams?" you echo. "Dreams can't be taxed," she says with a wink. "But flavor gets you inspected." A man in mustard-colored robes stomps up to a vendor with a sign that reads, "Holy honey, blessed by bees." The inspector taps the sign. "Bees can't bless." The vendor doesn't flinch. "You ever met a bee that couldn't judge character?" The inspector walks off, shaking his head. In one corner of the square, a young woman hawks fish with almost hypnotic rhythm. "2 for silver, 3 for song, pick the plumpest, still warm from seafoam dreams." You nearly buy one just to applaud the Article 17, he intones. "No poetic solicitation within 12 tases of combustibles." The woman with the fish sighs and pushes her cart, exactly 13 paces. A bystander claps. "Now, that's a professional." Another hawker nudges you. Don't say fresh unless you can prove the date. Don't say magic dot unless you've got a license. And for the love of Saint Michel, don't mention love apples unless you want 3 days in cabbage duty. Love apples? Tomatoes. Confusing things. Too red. Too romantic. People got ideas. The legal loopholes here are as thick as garlic soup. Some vendors use code. Sunkissed means 2 days old. Monastery approved means the baker down the lane is related to a monk. Market blessed means nothing, but it sounds official. You notice a sausage vendor silently holding up his wares, not speaking a word. A placard beside him reads, "Pleading silence. All statements approved by Guild." You give him a thumbs up. He nods back, gravely. Then, out of nowhere, a man with a squeaky cart bursts into the square and shouts, "I sell nothing. I promise nothing. I am but a vessel for your cravings." Everyone applauds. The inspector sighs. It's theater, it's legal drama, it's food poetry under surveillance. And you're loving every strange moment. In one final glorious scene, two rival barkers face off across the cobblestones. "Her apples are last week's regrets," shouts one. "His pears smell of disappointment and goat," replies the other. Both get fined, but neither cares, because in this world, the real currency is the crowd's laughter. And in the background, just barely audible, the town bell rings once, signaling that shouting hour is over. Now begins the scale inspections. Good luck with that. The moment the bell rings, a hush ripples through the market. Not total silence, but the kind of wary quiet that descends when people know the scales are coming. It's weighing hour. Time to prove you're not shortchanging your neighbors, or worse, doing math wrong. You watch as three men in faded robes approach, each carrying an official brass weight, a stern expression, and what appears to be an emotional grudge against dishonesty. These are the balance inspectors, also known locally as the Jingle Man, thanks to the clinking of their weighted pouches. They descend on a spice vendor first. His stall is modest. Saffron, cloves, cinnamon, all tiny quantities, big implications. The inspector places a perfect bronze weight on the left pan, then gestures toward a bag of nutmeg. "Your measure," he says, stone-faced. The vendor gently pours the spice into the opposite pan, hands trembling. The scales dip, pause, and balance. A sigh of relief. For now. "Your scale, Jingle, was weak," the inspector murmurs. "Excuse me?" "The proper weight should ring 3 tones," he says, rattling his brass weights like a bell choir in mourning. "Yours gave 2. That's grounds for suspicion." You blink. They really judge the sound of a scale settling? Oh yes, historians still argue whether this bizarre form of auditory measurement was more superstition or skill. Some medieval sources even describe special weighing harmonies expected in professional market stalls, clear, musical, and matching the official guild chime. If your scales jangled wrong, you might be accused of deceitful metallurgy. A fishmonger nearby isn't so lucky. Her brass pan tilts too quickly, her anchovies fall short of the mark, and the inspector sniffs the air dramatically. "These fish are light," he announces. "Too light. Either they're old, or the scale lies." He snatches a coin from her earnings box and plunks it into the penalty cup. No words exchanged, just cold, greasy justice. You drift past the commotion and stumble upon something delightful. A salt merchant is performing sleight of hand tricks with his measuring spoons. "A dash for your stew, a pinch for your sins, a heap for your in-laws," he quips, tossing salt into the air like confetti. His customers laugh. The inspector watches from a distance, then slowly he approaches. "You'll demonstrate an official pour," he says flatly. The merchant nods, suddenly serious. He grabs his certified market spoon, yes, that's a real thing, levels it off like a surgeon preparing for delicate work, and pours into the scale pan. The inspector listens. 1, 2, 3 soft clinks. He nods and departs. The merchant exhales, then resumes juggling salt bags. She glares but complies. You spot a makeshift booth nearby labeled Weight Calibration Booth, 2 sous per clans. A clever entrepreneur has set up a scale reset station where vendors can re-verify their weights between inspections. One vendor hands over a set of tin discs. The calibrator sniffs them, taps them twice against a stone, and says, "These were near cheese. Cheese can warp metal." "Really?" the vendor asks. "Probably not," the calibrator shrugs, "but that's what the inspectors believe." And that's the thing. In this world, perception is law. One cheese merchant explains his approach. "Always oversell the weight. I give them more brie than they paid for. No one finds a generous man." You smile. Clever. But generosity has limits. A honey seller is crying beside his broken scale. One of the balance arms snapped in two mid-sale. A customer accused him of fraud, and now the inspector hovers. "Do you have a backup scale?" he asks. The seller points to a small, rusted thing at the edge of the stall. The inspector frowns. "That's a poultry scale." "It's small," the vendor says, "but faithful." It doesn't matter. He's fined anyway. "Rule 47, the inspector mumbles. Weights must match the goods in spirit and substance. You write that one down. It sounds poetic, also totally meaningless. In the corner of the square, a child with no stall at all is selling small sacks of dried lavender. He has no scale, no license, and yet he's thriving. "What about the inspectors?" you ask him. He grins. "I don't sell by weight. I sell by story." "By story?" "Each bag has a tale inside. That one," he points, "was blessed by the last nightingale of spring. This one was harvested during a thunderstorm." You buy two. Because why not? The inspectors pass him without comment. Perhaps even they respect the hustle. You move on, ears still half listening for the jingle of judgment. It seems the market lives in balance, not just of scales, but of personalities. Traders perform, inspectors hover, and everything teeters between law and laughter. Behind you, a merchant whispers to his friend, "I hear next year they're checking voices too, measuring sincerity by tone." "Better start singing," the other replies. Just when you think you've wrapped your head around fish measurements and whispering cheese scales, you round a corner and step into a world ruled not by weight or volume, but by paperwork and bloodlines. Welcome to the license lane. Here, stalls are quieter, not because business is slow, but because vendors are busy defending their right to be here at all. A woman in a russet apron is smoothing out a parchment the size of a bedsheet. Her license. Written in a tight, spiraling script, it outlines when her family first earned market rights, 1327, the 5 generations that followed, and her recent request to sell gooseberry preserves 2 feet closer to the fountain. You overhear her say, "My great-grandmother got this stall after saving the mayor's wife from a runaway donkey." The original license came with a plum exemption clause. The clerk nods solemnly and presses a wax seal to the parchment's edge. You're learning that in medieval French towns, vendor licenses weren't just slips of permission. They were full-on family sagas, sometimes decorated, occasionally sung, and in rare cases, forged. You pass a nervous-looking man holding what appears to be a genealogy scroll stained with wine. That's a wine blot, not a forged signature. He insists to a skeptical clerk. Historians still argue whether market licenses were based more on merit or nepotism, the clerk replies, then squints at the scroll. You've claimed descent from Jean the Turnip Knight. That's right. He once traded 50 turnips for a goat and a handshake from Charles VI. Do you have a crest? A drawing. My niece did it. He produces a child's sketch of a smiling vegetable with a sword. You wait. The clerk shrugs and stamps it. Apparently, confidence counts. Nearby, a younger vendor in a saffron scarf displays no paperwork at all, just a carved wooden plaque with the family name and a slogan. Bread since before the plague. License? A clerk asks. It burned in the garlic fire of 1398. Prove it. Smell my cart. He does, winces. Smells accurate. Stamp. Others take it even further. One family has set up a miniature museum behind their fig stall. Painted portraits, locks of ancestor hair, and a mummified apple said to have been sliced by Saint-Denis himself. You pass a fishmonger whispering urgently to a scribe, "Write fast. I need a document that proves my grandfather owned this plot." Did he? No. But his friend's cousin once fished here. That's something. A few vendors go the oral tradition route. One elderly man sits beside his olive jars and recites his license out loud, like a bard singing lineage instead of ballads. By right of Jean-Pierre the Briner, each 2 women, identical scarves, identical loaves, both claiming the same stall. "I'm Margot," says the first. "No, I'm Margot," says the second. They hold up matching licenses, the same parchment, same seal, same official doodle of a badger holding bread. The inspector groans. Someone copied someone. "But who?" you whisper. "No one knows," says a passerby. "It's the Margot mystery. Happens every 3 years." He buys bread from both. "Covering my bases." You glance around and notice a smaller, quieter stall with a sign, "Forged documents by appointment." You don't dare go near it, but the vendor offers you a wink and a loaf of paperwork-shaped gingerbread. You take it. The bureaucratic dance continues. You witness a nobleman in teal boots try to claim a prime location next to the fountain. "Do you have family rights here?" the clerk asks. "I'm a third cousin of the Duke's glove painter." "That's not a recognized guild." "It is in Avignon." "Avignon isn't here." "You wound me." "No, sir, I license you." Denied. Some clerks are stricter than others. A candlemaker with perfectly trimmed beard presents a triple-folded license, complete with embedded wax portrait. The clerk squints. "This was written in duck ink." "Is that a problem?" "No, just impressive." Stamp. In this patchwork of faded scrolls and whispered lineage, you notice a pattern. Those with better stories tend to fare better than those with just facts. And those who smile, even while bluffing, tend to keep their stalls. You finally pass a vendor with no scroll, no sign, and no speech. She just has a basket of lavender and a tiny embroidered token pinned to her shawl. The clerk sees it, pauses, and nods. No stamp, no words, just recognition. "Who is she?" you ask. An older vendor leans over. "That's old Cameline. She was licensed before licenses." "How old is she?" "Unknown, but she's never failed an inspection." You walk on, realizing this street may run on rules, but it lives on relationships. And next comes the oddest rule of all: which items you're allowed to sell and in what order. Time to find out why you must sell bread before candles. You're barely a few cobblestones away from License Lane when something strange catches your eye. A vendor is standing in perfect stillness behind a tidy wooden stall. On the table, one round loaf of bread, one beeswax candle, one small parchment sign that reads in careful script, "Waiting for the baker's bell." You blink. The vendor nods politely but doesn't speak, doesn't gesture, doesn't sell. You whisper to a passerby, "Is something wrong?" "Oh no," they say. "He's just following the bread order." The what? Welcome to one of the oddest rules in the medieval French street market playbook, the legally enforced sequence of sale. And it all starts with a very serious rule. You must sell bread before candles. Always. It sounds like nonsense, and it kind of is, but it's enforced nonsense. Break the order and you risk fines, confiscation, or a gentle but humiliating public warning in rhyme. Historians still argue whether this law was originally about fire safety, fairness to bakers, or just a town councilor who once got burned trying to light a lamp before dinner. Regardless, the rule stuck. Food first, fire second. You pass another vendor who has carefully arranged her wares: apples, then sausages, then wine, then, and only at the end of the stall, several taper candles with a tiny sign: for purchase only after foodstuffs. And yes, she says foodstuffs out loud to every customer. She's very serious. The reasoning gets even stranger when you dig deeper. According to a nearby clerk, who is more than happy to explain things, the official order of legal vendor offerings in this town is as follows: bread, fresh produce, cooked meat, pickled things, uncooked meat, but only on Wednesdays, milk or milk-like substances, soap, cloth goods, household tools, candles, firewood, anything that might singe eyebrows. You stare. Singe eyebrows? Yes, the clerk says gravely. We once had an issue with hair oils and open torches. You nod slowly. At another stall, you overhear a merchant mutter, "I could have been selling lanterns, but no, the candle order ruins everything." He's forced to wait for a nearby bread seller to arrive so he can officially follow them and fulfill the sequence. Until then, he just sits there with a wax pyramid and a frown. A few vendors get clever. A sausage seller with candle ambitions has labeled his goods bread-shaped pork rolls so he can skip the wait. He also offers yeast-seasoned pork buns and holy loaf sausages. No one believes him, but he's fun at parties. Down the lane, a soap vendor is pushing his luck. His stall sign says, "Bread for the soul," shaped like soap. The inspector strolls past, sniffs a bar, and shrugs.
Within seconds, you see the candle maker toss his lit sample into a bucket and frantically slice a baguette in half to qualify for early sales. "They hold! Bread first!" he cries, waving a croissant like a banner. The inspector isn't impressed. He stamps the stall with a yellow wax mark. Order breach, mild. 3 of those, and you're doing inventory at the fish stall for a month. Why the drama? Because these rules weren't just ceremonial. They were tied to space, respect, and social rhythm. Selling out of order could be seen as challenging the town's hierarchy, especially if your goods involved light, heat, or tools. Those were symbols of power. And bread? Bread was life. You overhear a mother telling her son, "We eat before we build. We chew before we burn." That's the law. Even children learn the rhythm. One small girl skips past, singing, "First the loaf, then the soap. Only after may flames elope." Catchy, and slightly terrifying. In the far corner of the market, you find a lone old man selling only candles. His stall is empty, but for one unlit taper and a small loaf balanced on the wax. "That's my loophole," he says with a wink. Bread first, literally. A customer walks up and asks, "Is the bread for sale?" "No, it's a moral offering." He still gets a stamp of approval. And so you come to accept this upside-down world of ritualized selling sequences, where flour precedes fire, and no one lights a wick until the baguettes say it's time. Because in medieval France, even illumination must wait its turn. You wander toward the produce stalls now, the air turning greener, sharper, onions, leeks, and lettuce soaked in morning dew. But as you get closer, something curious catches your ear. Not a bell, not a hawker's shout. A whistle. Short, cheerful, melodic. You look over. A cart pusher in a teal cap is softly whistling a tune as he wheels his vegetables through the cobbled lane. A handful of customers even tap their feet. And then, like a hawk from the rafters, a market guard swoops in. "That's a fine," he says, not unkindly.
The cart pusher sighs. Seriously, again? You know the rule. No singing, no whistling, no excessive humming, especially in the cabbage zone. You stare. Surely this is a joke. But no, it's very real. Turns out, in this particular town, music of any sort is forbidden within 10 feet of leafy greens. Historians still argue whether this bizarre rule was based on concerns about bruising produce, disrupting fair sales, or simply that one time a lute player tripped and impaled a melon. Whatever the origin, the rule stuck. The cabbage zone, marked by a discreet carved goose on the post, is a silent stretch of street. The moment you cross into it, hawkers lower their voices, and customers mime their requests. It's eerily reverent, like entering a church of spinach. A radish vendor leans in and whispers, "It's not about the sound, really. It's about respect." For the cabbages, you ask? No, for the turnips. They started it. You don't pursue that line of inquiry. You pass a spinach seller who's been cited for tapping his fingers on a barrel in rhythm. The inspector measured the beat. Too close to a folk jig. "Next time I'll twitch off tempo," he mutters. Even laughter is suspect. One giggling customer gets a stern glare after a snort near the kale pile. There's even a sign posted. This is a low-decibel lettuce lane. Offenders will be hushed. And they're serious. One poor merchant who accidentally sang a line from an old harvest tune, "O carrots bright, your roots delight," was banned from the market for 3 days and forced to sell his wares from a muddy ditch labeled Song Pen. Yet, in the shadows, rebellion stirs. You catch wind of an underground group, the produce minstrels. They gather in the alleys behind stalls, singing quiet ballads about leeks, turnips, and love lost to horseradish. One of their songs goes, "He wooed her with shallots, she fled with a yam. Their hearts stewed apart in a beet braising pan." They've become local legends. Some say, if a stall decorated with silk ribbons offers silent produce poetry. Each vegetable comes with a handwritten haiku to make up for the ban on spoken ads. One reads, "Beneath cabbage leaves, quiet thoughts of boiling broth. Even stew has peace." You buy a radish just to applaud the creativity. As you leave the leafy lanes, the sound returns. You hear a tambourine jingle faintly from the poultry corner. Different zoning, a vendor explains. You can yodel near eggs, just not lettuce. Another fruit seller adds, "Music near apples is fine. They're vain. They like attention." You nod, realizing you've crossed into medieval sonic zoning law, where not just what you sell, but how quietly you sell it can make or break your career. At the edge of the market, a small crowd is gathered around a man on a crate. He's not selling anything. He's reciting a list. No flutes near fennel. No bagpipes within 6 feet of garlic. No rhyming couplets near mushrooms. Absolutely no singing near celery unless the moon is waning. "What is this?" you whisper. "A recitation of Article 73, the Produce Quietude Mandate," someone replies. "Town bylaws require it be read weekly. We call him the Whisper Bard." He finishes the list with a bow. No applause, just respectful nods. You walk on, head full of rules, ears full of imaginary music, and in your heart, a faint tune. "O cabbage, dear cabbage, your silence is gold, but deep in my basket, my turnips grow bold." You leave the cabbage hush behind, your ears practically ringing from the absence of noise, and head toward a much brighter corner of the market. The air smells of lavender, tallow, and something faintly medicinal. Here, you've stumbled into the soap and scent district, and immediately you're struck by one thing. Everyone's wearing yellow. Bright saffron tunics, faded butter-colored aprons. Even a few mustard-dyed hats bobbing between barrels of lye and herb bundles. It's not just a fashion trend, it's a rule. Soap sellers, perfumers, and anyone peddling odorous goods, by town ordinance, must wear yellow, head to toe if possible. Why? That depends on who you ask. Historians still argue whether the yellow garb was meant to signal cleanliness, warn of strong smells, or just help identify vendors most likely to offend a nobleman's nose. Regardless, it's enforced with medieval zeal. A stout woman selling rosemary soap waves you over. Her tunic glows like a ripe lemon. Want to sniff something that'll unclog your sins? She grins. You ask about the yellow rule. Pride or punishment, she says, depending on your attitude. You soon realize not all yellow wearers are happy about it. One teenage assistant is clearly wearing a borrowed oversized smock and has tried to tie-dye it with onion skins and shame. Doesn't help. I wanted to be a baker, he mutters. No uniforms there, just flour. The soap master beside him scoffs. Flour doesn't scrub you clean after you've stirred pig tallow for 4 hours. Another stall is run by an elderly man who has leaned into the aesthetic. His booth is decorated with golden bunting. He's dyed his beard a matching ochre, and he greets each customer with, "Yellow, my dears, the color of purity, lemons and regulated market zones." He offers free whiffs of soap named things like Night's Regret, Basilic Breeze, and Mildew No More. You sniff Night's Regret. It smells like cloves, old regrets, and possibly horse. Next door, a more sullen vendor is being inspected. A town clerk holds up a fabric swatch and compares it to the seller's sleeve. This is beige, the inspector says. You know the rule. It's a warm ochre. It's cowardly parchment. Fix it or face the soap stocks. Yes, soap stocks. A minor but effective punishment where rule breakers are seated next to spoiled soap barrels and forced to listen to customers complain about soap-related disappointments for hours. You glance behind the stall and see one poor fellow slumped next to a cracked lavender bar while a noblewoman drones. And then, after the second use, the scent just faded. It vanished like my cousin's dignity. Another part of the yellow rule? No mixing trades. If you sell soap, you sell only soap. You cannot, under any condition, add candles or perfume unless you submit a blended goods petition, a 14-page form requiring wax samples, scent diagrams, and sometimes you pass a vendor practicing a clumsy reel near a bucket of scented wax. He stops mid-spin and mutters, "For the petition board. They like movement." Then there's the matter of colors within yellow. Bright yellow means scented soap. Dull yellow? Medicinal. Goldenrod with white trim? Perfume only. Yellow with green edging? Experimental lather. You ask what that means. The vendor says, you don't want to know. Further down the row, you spot a young seller in perfect yellow garb, standing beside a suspiciously non-scented cart. What's your product, you ask. He winks and lifts a lid. Underneath, roasted almonds. You blink. That's not soap. Nope. But no one questions yellow. It's the perfect disguise. You nod, impressed by the grift. The yellow cloak is not just regulation, it's camouflage for the creative. Some try to rebel in subtler ways. One vendor has embroidered tiny insults into the hem of her smock. You peer closer and read, "This rule stinks more than our soap." A woman nearby whispers, "Careful, the fashion watchers might see." Yes, that's a real thing. 3 cloaked figures walk the soap lane carrying fabric swatches, color wheels, and one enormous scented feather. They tap vendors whose hues drift too close to buttercream or, heaven forbid, lemon lime. At one booth, they declare a tunic too mellow. The vendor sighs, changes into a brighter robe on the spot, and gives them each a bar of compliance citrus. You ask one of the feathered enforcers if they enjoy the job. "Oh yes," they reply. "I like telling people they're not yellow enough." As you reach the end of the lane, the air clears. You see a final vendor with nothing on her stall but a bar of soap and a note. This soap obeys all rules. I, however, do not. She wears forest green. You meet eyes. She winks. Rebellion, it seems. Smells like mint and moss. You follow a winding lane behind the soap stalls, where the scent fades into damp straw and the occasional whiff of overly optimistic cheese. Here, the stalls feel quieter, humbler, sellers squatting by crates, scribbling prices on scrap wood, their voices hushed as if not to attract attention. And then you spot them, the inspection men. 3 of them stride into view like a troop of grim bureaucrats summoned from a parchment scroll. Cloaked in dull gray robes, belts jangling with seals and brass tokens, they carry strange instruments, wax stamps, polished wooden rulers, and one disturbingly smug ferret on a leash. Welcome to the part of town no one likes to talk about, the realm of market hygiene enforcement. Their job? To inspect crates, counters, containers, and even carts for cleanliness, conformity, and the curious crime of overly enthusiastic fruit stacking. Yes, that's a thing. You shadow them as they begin their rounds. At the onion stall, one inspector unrolls a thin sheet of vellum with a printed diagram of acceptable onion heights. He measures a pyramid of shallots, frowns, and carefully removes the top 3. 3 onions too tall, he says. Citation issued. But they're my best onions, the seller pleads. Too fragrant, too proud, the inspector replies, handing him a yellow wax token marked with the town crest, a leaping goose with a turnip in its beak. You watch in disbelief. Another inspector opens a crate of apples and sniffs. Not the apples, but the crate wood. After a thoughtful pause, he declares, "Smells too much like fish. Probable reuse from the anchovy cart. 5 lira fine." Historians still argue whether these inspections were genuinely about public health or more about controlling competition through intimidation and performative sniffing. You lean in closer as the 3rd inspector unlatches a small box and pulls out a tiny rake. He uses it to fluff the straw bedding under a pumpkin. It must feel aerated, he explains to no one in particular. A flat-bottomed gourd is a sad gourd. You make a note to embroider that on a pillow. Then comes the ferret. Named Geoffroy, apparently. He's the star of the squad. They unleash him near stalls with suspicious shadows or corners too quiet for comfort. If Geoffroy curls up and sleeps, clean. If he scampers under a crate and refuses to emerge, possible infestation, immediate forfeit. A merchant offers him a fig. Geoffroy accepts, then proceeds to urinate on a potato. The inspector nods, solemn. The verdict? Excessive adventurousness. You may keep the cheese, but must label it volatile. They burn a seal into a wooden tag and hang it on the wheel. Next door, a spice seller tries a different tactic. Distraction. He recites the entire history of cinnamon trade routes while casually brushing something under his rug. Geoffroy notices. The ferret lunges. A small pouch of damp saffron emerges. The inspector nods. Saffron of questionable dryness. 1 week stall ban. Geoffroy gets to pick another spice. The ferret selects cloves. You can't help but notice the inspections are not just about tidiness. They also function as a kind of street theater. The crowd watches. Vendors perform. Even the punishments have flair. You pass a vendor with a cleanest crate of the week ribbon, proudly displayed. When asked what he did, he says, I waxed my celery. With love. Another vendor whispers that bribes don't work. Not with this crew. They took a whole roast goose from old Henri, she mutters, then fined him for excessive generosity. Sometimes, though, enforcement goes too far. At the herb stall, an old woman is cited for suspiciously symmetrical thyme bunches. She bursts into tears. The inspectors soften slightly, allowing her to rearrange them into a more chaotic pattern. Geoffroy approves. She's spared the fine. It's a delicate balance. Vendors must walk a tightrope between order and rustic authenticity. Too clean? Suspicious. Too messy? Dangerous. Too quiet? Alarming. Too loud? Clearly guilty. You ask an inspector what their official motto is. He clears his throat and quotes, "In all things measured, in all corners sniffed, may the market stay just clean enough to thrive." It almost sounds poetic, until Geoffroy sneezes in your general direction, and the inspector barks, "Put that apple down. He's alerted on it." You place it gently back in the bin and take a step away. As you leave the inspection zone, you look back at the chaos. Tape measures, wax tokens, crate tilts, and ferret trails. You're not sure whether to feel safe or terrified. But one thing's clear. In medieval France, cleanliness was next to absurdity. You wander out from under the stern gaze of the inspection men and into a lighter drizzle than you expected. A soft, soaking rain patters against the cobblestones, painting everything in muted tones of slate, moss, and old tomato. Vendors scramble, but slowly, resigned, not panicked. Because this, too, is regulated. You've stumbled into the jurisdiction of weather laws. Yes, actual bylaws governing behavior in rain, snow, fog, and even unfortunate gusts of wind. The medieval French market was nothing if not obsessed with civic order, and that included how vendors were allowed to react to the sky. A merchant beside you throws a canvas over her onions and mutters, "Better the rain than the puddle fine." You blink. "Puddle fine?" She nods grimly. 2 copper deniers if your cart splashes a friar, 3 if the friar's robe is white. Sure enough, a posted notice nearby reads, "No splashing of holy garments, by order of the Council of Soggy Monks." You step cautiously around a shallow puddle, just in case. Historians still argue whether these weather-related rules were actually about public safety or just a way to make sure monks stayed dry and the Cobblers Guild had consistent work. There were specific protocols for each type of weather. In rain, stalls may not be shifted under church eaves without paying a roof proximity fee. Tarps must be linen, not wool, to avoid dye runoff. Umbrellas are forbidden within 10 paces of firewood stalls for visibility concerns. In fog, bell ringing is required at each cart. Loud fruit descriptions, "Plump pear, juicy plum," must be repeated every 10 seconds to alert others to your location. In wind, feathers must be secured. Bread cannot be sold if airborne. Chickens, if loose, must be declared and tagged with ribbons. You see a vendor nervously pinning a red string to a chicken's leg. "Wind's picking up," he says. "I can feel it in my elbows." A guard in a damp cloak passes by, tapping each puddle with a silver-tipped cane. You watch as he pauses at one, measures its width with a string, then writes down a number in a small booklet. "That's puddle 47B, someone whispers. "If it touches the baker's stool again, he's in trouble." But it's not just puddles that are dangerous. Rain shifting, moving your cart or stall after rainfall, was strictly regulated. The logic? Post-rain ground becomes soft, and dragging stalls damages the cobbles. Vendors had to file a temporary relocation slip, which required a mud footprint as signature. You pass a clerk holding a scroll and inspecting muddy boot prints. "This isn't a left heel from Maurice's cart," he mutters. "This is a boot from the carrot zone. Fraud." Further ahead, you see a scene of mild chaos. A young woman has covered her celery. Yes, he says with exaggerated sympathy. And now your stall is both moist and non-compliant. She sighs and removes the offending blanket, revealing some unusually angry parsley. Just then, the wind picks up, and 3 baguettes fly from a nearby stall, sailing like yeasty javelins across the square. One lands squarely in a cabbage pile. 5 copper cross-contamination fee, someone yells. Another strikes a scribe's inkwell. Ink splashes. People gasp. The scribe lifts the baguette solemnly, tears off the inked part, and eats the rest. Regulation ink, he shrugs. Berry-based. You step into a small alcove to avoid the worst of the drizzle, and observe a strange ritual. Vendors kneeling beside their stalls, tracing water patterns with sticks. What are they doing? You ask. Praying for drainage, says an old woman beside you. Also checking that runoff doesn't trespass. You see, if your puddle enters another person's trade boundary, that's a fluid violation. Indeed, one man begins accusing another. That's your potato water leaking under my walnut crate. They call over a water adjudicator, a child with a wooden level and an extremely serious expression. He squints, taps his board, and declares, "Both guilty, shared fine." At a small fruit stand, the vendor has strung dozens of goose feathers on a string across his stall. "Wind tellers," he explains. "The council lets us use them if the breeze exceeds 3 sighs per minute." You ask how a sigh is measured. He stares at you for a long moment, then simply exhales. You nod, understanding absolutely nothing. In the distance, a bell rings 3 times. Once for rain, once for a puddle over 6 inches, once for wind above 2 scarves. It's the weather compliance chime. Vendors groan and begin packing up in reverse order of product perishability, a protocol outlined in the Drizzle Compliance Codex, which you are now 70% sure someone made up after too much mead. A final sign hangs near the gate. Remember, no dancing in sleet, no commerce in hail, and no complaining about either. You smile, soaked through but thoroughly entertained. In this market, the weather is not just a nuisance, it's a bureaucratic art form. As the drizzle finally fades and the clouds retreat like embarrassed gossipers, you follow a trail of breadcrumbs, literal ones, toward a less chaotic corner of the market. The vendors here aren't shouting. They aren't hawking their wares with dramatic arm gestures or being chased by ferrets in uniform. No, this is the permit district. It looks quiet, orderly, respectable. But don't be fooled. This is where the real drama happens. You pass a booth with no goods at all, just a man sitting behind a wooden desk holding a single scroll. A sign reads, "License applications. Speak only if prepared." You whisper to yourself, prepared for what? Because in this part of the market, no one can sell anything. Not bread, not butter, not embroidered hedgehog napkins, without the correct guild permit, trade license, and area-specific badge of authorization. Historians still argue whether these permits were invented to keep people safe or just to keep parchment sellers in business. Some argue both. Most agree they made everything a whole lot slower. You reach a textile stall where the merchant is explaining to a customer, "I have the right to sell wool, but not dyed wool. That's my brother-in-law's permit. If you want color, you'll have to visit him 2 stalls down." You do, and sure enough, the brother-in-law greets you with a bow and says, "Same family, different paperwork." The next booth is even more confusing. A woman is selling turnips, but only ones under a specific weight. A clerk wanders by with a small iron scale and randomly weighs a few. "This one's over the tuber limit," he announces. "Please slice it in half or apply for the root excess exception form." You half expect someone to pop out with a marching band just to make the point. And then you see the permitteer. She's seated at a high table, flanked by scrolls stacked so high they sway gently like architectural threats. On her head, a velvet hat embroidered with tiny gold stamps. Every merchant must bow as they pass. "She knows all the zones," whispers one seller. "She once revoked a garlic license mid-sentence." It's said she can sense an expired permit from 20 paces, and that her quill once wrote 5 denials in under 10 seconds. You watch as a hopeful young vendor presents a fresh cheese sample in a sheepishly folded form. The permitteer sniffs. She raises an eyebrow. This form was filled out in charcoal, not approved ink. The vendor gulps. I ran out." She nods. "Then you run out of this market." He slinks away. Geoffroy, the ferret, appears from nowhere and escorts him off the cobbles. You're not even surprised anymore. At another stall, "Each color indicates a different permit zone," she explains. "This one's legal in the northern lane. This one is for Market Extension C. And this one," she winks, "is technically unapproved, but it's my bestseller. I call it the Spoon of Mystery." You buy it on principle. Next, you pass the stamp table. Every vendor is required to have a personal seal applied to all transactions. One stamp for purchases, one for complaints, and, most confusing of all, one for compliments. A woman buys a bunch of grapes. The vendor smiles and stamps a pink wax seal onto a chit. "That's for saying I have a lovely hat," she says. "The guild requires documentation of kindness." Some permits are physical badges. Others are entire hats. One seller has what looks like a full cabbage strapped to his head. You ask. He sighs. "It's the official insignia for the leafy goods concession zone. It's heavy, but legal." A scribe nearby is writing down everything. You glance at his parchment. Tally of permits observed today: 3 cabbage hats, 7 ink violations, 2 unauthorized marmalades, 1 spoon scandal. He adds, "Also a very confident pigeon." Sure enough, a pigeon is strutting across the table, wearing a tiny scroll tied to its leg. Some say certain vendors use birds to deliver permit updates. Others say the pigeon is just nosy. Either way, it gets a tiny breadcrumb and a salute. Then you see the appeals booth. It's been abandoned. The parchment says, "Clerk gone for soup. Estimated return, uncertain." A line has still formed. People wait patiently to appeal ridiculous citations. One for excessive saffron optimism. One for selling olives that wink. One for a crate that felt sarcastic. Yes, even tone of crate is apparently up for debate. But not all is tyranny here. A small group of rogue scribes runs a permit forgery school under a tent that smells strongly of ink and rebellion. They're offering workshops titled Italic Script for the Sneaky Vendor, How to Forge a Wax Seal Without Getting Ferreted, Fake Guild Names That Sound Plausible. You don't enroll, but you do take a pamphlet. By the time you exit the permit district, you're weighed down by stamps, ribbons, and paperwork you don't remember receiving. Still, you leave with one truth etched in your brain. In this market, selling an apple without a license was riskier than jousting with a baguette. You head back toward the market square as twilight settles like a slow exhale over the rooftops. The cobblestones glisten from the earlier rain. Lanterns flicker to life, their amber glow smudging the shadows with warmth, and the smell of roasted chestnuts competes gently with something faintly fishy, probably Geoffroy. Vendors are beginning to pack up, some in silence, some with the coordinated chaos of a closing symphony. Crates creak, shutters clack, and cloth awnings are rolled down with the resigned rustle of another day's rule survived. And that's when you hear it. A soft bell, not the weather compliance chime or the suspicious potato alert. This one is melodic. You follow the sound to a small, almost hidden booth tucked behind a tapestry cellar. There's no sign, no price board, just a flickering candle, a tiny stool, and a woman spinning wool by hand. Her hair is silver, but her shawl is deep blue, embroidered with dozens of tiny stamped seals. You've seen those before. Permit badges. All of them. She catches your glance. Collecting rules? You ask, only half joking. She smiles. Living them. She spins her threads slowly, evenly, rhythmically, like she's weaving every market law and loophole into one long strand of memory. You sit across from her without asking. No one else around seems to notice you've both become still, as if stepping out of time. She begins to speak in a low, steady tone. You know, she says, it wasn't always this way, or perhaps it always was, just quieter. She talks of vendors who sold honey by whispering to bees, of soap makers who sang to their cauldrons, of bakers who swore the moon decided their crusts, and yes, of rule makers who sometimes added a new code just because their in-laws sold leeks and needed a nudge. Historians still argue whether the most absurd regulations were born of necessity, corruption, or sheer medieval mischief. But the woman leans in and says maybe they were all stories, pretending to be laws, or laws pretending to be stories. She lets the silence settle, heavy and soft. All around you, the market continues its graceful unraveling. Lanterns sway, wheels rattle, a rooster complains about being awake at the wrong end of the day. You rise to leave, but she hands you something. A small card, parchment, stamped with a wax seal shaped like a pillow. It's the official permit for dreaming, she says. Issued freely, revoked only by worry. You tuck it in your sleeve. As you head for the exit gate, you pass the inspection ferret curled asleep in a hammock made from rejected aprons. One inspector snores beside him, mumbling something about time symmetry violations. A bard nearby strums a lute tuned entirely to the key of Barely Trying. You catch a last glimpse of the square. Empty crates stacked like sleepy soldiers. One candle still burning in a jug of pickled onions. A small sign left hanging, closed for regular. You pass beneath the archway where the market ends, and the street begins. And now, your feet move slower. The night feels warmer. The absurdity of a world built on too many rules somehow makes the quiet all the more profound. Because tonight, you wandered not through chaos, but through a living, breathing scroll of human silliness, survival, and soft rebellion. And that scroll, dear listener, just tucked you into bed. So now let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of cobblestone stories slide gently off your back. The distant ring of market bells fades, replaced by the quiet hush of a world falling asleep. The parchment rustles only in memory now, and the scent of roasting chestnuts drifts away like a last warm breath from the day. You still carry that tiny seal, permission to rest, to dream, to pause. Maybe it was always yours. Let yourself picture that empty square, aglow with lantern light. Imagine Geoffroy, tail twitching softly in his sleep, dreaming of contraband grapes and victorious inspections. Let your thoughts ripple out like puddles unmeasured, like rules finally forgotten. The voices of vendors dim into murmurs. The jokes linger like the steam of soup shared on a damp bench. The sky overhead, once a bureaucratic obstacle, is now just soft and endless. Tonight, nothing is required of you. No stamps, no tokens, no permits. Just quiet. Let your breath slow. Let your mind soften. Let the night hold you gently, the way parchment curls in warmth. And when sleep finally comes, may it come with ribbons tied to your thoughts and a spoon of mystery tucked under your dreams. You've earned it.